This is Harvest Moon Homecoming, Sweet Haven Farm Sweet Small Town Romance, Book 1. Written by Jesse Gussman. Performed by J. Dice. Episode 5. Chapter 9. Fink floated on air the rest of the day. He remembered to tell the janitorial staff about the school and grounds for Friday, and sent a group email to all the teachers about the visitors. He went through the motions of his job, but Ellie and the way the sunlight had hit her face and hair this afternoon when he walked in filled his mind. Her beautiful eyes, the delighted expression on her face when she saw him. He could come home to that every day, easily. Between thinking about Ellie, he also researched different ways of building the float. By the time he ran into the shed to escape the cold drizzle that evening, he was confident he had plans ready that would work. Ellie and a young, maybe college-aged man looked up when he burst in. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were here." He figured they'd be up at the office/shop, or maybe the house. He turned to walk back outside into the drizzle. "Stay, Fink, we're almost done," Ellie called. He stepped back in, closing the door behind him. She turned to the man at her side. "As I was saying, this is the shed where we keep most of our tools." She waved her arm around, indicating the loaded shelves. "Have you ever used a chainsaw?" "Nope." The kid scratched his head. "Didn't have much need of one in the development where I grew up." "Okay, you'd have to learn how. The customers are given handsaws to cut their trees down with, but if we have a big order to fill, sometimes we'll load several tractor trailers, especially at the beginning of the season. A handsaw just doesn't cut it." Fink smiled at her paronomasia, but the kid didn't seem to notice. "Aren't they kind of dangerous?" The boy shifted on his feet. Ellie stopped. Fink bit back a snort at her dumbfounded expression. She ran a hand over her frizzed-out hair. "Well, yeah, you have to be careful." "I thought working on a Christmas tree farm would be kind of fun. I didn't realize I'd have to cut down trees. Isn't that like destroying Mother Earth?" He bunched his lips together and crossed his arms over his chest. "We plant new ones. It's fun." Fink coughed to hide his laugh. Saying "it's fun" through clenched teeth like Ellie just did made her sound like a parent saying spinach really does taste good. "But it's work, too. You said you worked at the fast food place in town?" "Yeah." "Why are you quitting?" "Those idiots scheduled me to be at work at 5:30 in the morning. Normal people don't get out of bed that early, and it's only minimum wage." He slouched against the tractor. Ellie shook her head. "Have you ever driven a tractor?" "We had a lawnmower when I was little, but my mom would never let me run it." "You'd have to learn that, too." Fink dealt with kids like this all the time and was impressed Ellie didn't roll her eyes. "It's kind of big." "Yeah. So," Ellie slapped her hands on her pants. "I think that's all. Christmas tree season starts the day after Thanksgiving, although we might have a few big orders to fill before that. I'll give you a call if we're interested." "Okay." The kid started to turn away, but stopped when Ellie held out her hand. He looked at it for a minute like he wasn't sure what to do with it, then shook it gingerly. "Thanks for coming. Can you find your way back up to the parking lot? I've got some work to do here." It was that way." He pointed in the exact wrong direction. Fink spoke up. "I'll walk him back up." Ellie gave him a grateful smile. "Thanks. Would you bring Harper and Wyatt back down with you?" Sure. Have you had supper yet?
I'll run over to the house and grab a bowl of stew from the crock pot. Have you eaten?
Yes. He wanted to reach out and put his arm around her. Her shoulders drooped and there were dark circles under her eyes. A stab of guilt touched his heart. He had asked a lot of her this week, and she had done her best at everything he'd asked. If she'd complained, he hadn't heard it. But he didn't touch her. He might end up kissing her again. Instead of doing what he really wanted to do, he followed the kid out the door. 15 minutes later, he was back. If Ellie went and got stew, she must have gobbled it down fast, since she was on the wagon, dismantling it when he walked in with Wyatt and Harper. When she saw them, she hopped off with an armload of gourds. His eyes widened as she placed them back in the groups he had organized, rather than tossing them down wherever. The pumpkins, too, were lined up in neat little rows. She must have done that for him, because she knew he liked things to be in order. He tucked that idea away to be brought out and examined later. She stood and smiled at him. He grinned back at her, then placed his briefcase on the back of the wagon and snapped it open. Ellie, Harper, and Wyatt gathered around the back of the wagon. First, he pulled out the top paper, the completed project. The big moon glowed in the back of the wagon, silhouettes of a man and woman standing face to face leaning into each other, but not quite kissing, were solid black against its yellow glow. A dirt road cut through green and yellow bucolic fields and seemed to fade off into the bottom of the moon. We'll place hay bales here for the king and queen to sit on and throw candy. He pointed to the back of the wagon. Then we'll have a banner on the back with an advertisement for your farm. If we can build that, it's going to look amazing. Wyatt stared at the picture.
We're going to figure it out or die trying,
Ellie said. Fink's chest warmed. Well, I just so happen to have this. He shuffled the papers, pulled out a blueprint to build the base, and laid it on the bed of the wagon so everyone could see. They all bent over it. I also have this. More shuffling produced 3 more papers with directions and dimensions on building the moon and covering the base with the scene depicting a dirt road running off in the distance, the massive moon rising directly over where the road disappeared into the horizon. This is way too complicated. Wyatt stepped back, shaking his head. Harper nodded. It looks that way, but I've been doing some research, and if we get giant pieces of hardboard, there won't need to be much support to get the moon that high because it won't weigh much, even though it's huge. Same with the walls of the base. The only things I was unsure of were how to get a light to shine on the moon and how to get that picture on the hardboard. I think it's too late to order screen printing.
Mom can do it. Easy.
Harper spoke up. She can paint that scene? Fink tried not to show his astonishment.
She can paint anything. She's an amazing artist.
Ellie tilted her head to the side, her lips pulled back.
If that's as big as it looks, it's going to take a massive amount of paint and time.
Fink shook his head. I was afraid of that. Maybe we could look into the screen printing.
That's going to be expensive,
Ellie stated. I know, but there is a budget for this, and I might be able to get more. Dr. Rothschild was pretty eager to impress her visitors. But since we don't have to buy any lumber...
I think if I had maybe 12, 18 hours, I could do it.
Ellie twisted a stray strand of hair.
But this is Wednesday night. I don't know where I could find the time.
Where are we going to get the hardboard? Wyatt spoke up from Fink's other side. Won't that be expensive?
Good question,
Ellie said.
I have some particle board around here, maybe a few sheets of plywood, but not enough, and no hardboard.
Mrs. Herschel's brother works at the hardboard factory outside of town. Turns out this weekend they had a machine malfunction and cut the sheets an inch or so too short. Fink adjusted the papers on his briefcase. It had been a stroke of tremendous luck that Mrs. Herschel had overheard his conversation and suggested hardboard. They've got a dumpster out back and it's full of perfect sheets that are just a little too short for specs, which wouldn't matter to us at all. The top pieces might be a bit wet from the rain yesterday, but we can dig down. He said there was a ton, and anyone was welcome to go and take what they wanted. Ellie narrowed her eyes at him.
You just suggested we pick stuff out of a dumpster?
Hardboard. Honestly, he was surprised that this woman who walked around perpetually disorganized, dodging masses of junk, would take umbrage at the idea of pulling something out of a dumpster. The store manager wouldn't keep it out for us.
I can't believe you suggested dumpster diving.
She moved her hands in a now I've seen everything gesture. It's just hardboard. Fink's nervousness morphed into irritation. He had beaten down his compunctions on rooting through what amounted to trash so that they could do this project. He was the neat freak, not her.
But there could be needles or vomit or anything in there.
Fink's chest ballooned with that familiar, strong emotion. He almost welcomed it. He noticed the color and lights in Ellie's eyes and wondered if she felt it too. He stepped toward her. Raising his voice, he said, I spent all this time researching and all you can do is complain?
I'm not complaining, I'm just shocked. Her voice had raised to not quite a shout.
Well, I didn't see you coming up with anything. He finished closing the distance between them and stood directly in front of her. That feeling, not exactly anger, but big and large and gripping, burst inside him.
That's because I don't have massive amounts of time to sit around and twiddle my perfectly manicured thumbs.
She stepped up on a pumpkin by her feet. Her face was now even with his. Her finger jammed in front of his nose. Possibly she was in the grip of the same emotion he was. Lady, your hands don't know the meaning of the word manicure, he shouted.
I didn't mean it as a compliment,
she shouted right back, looking him straight in the eye. Her chest heaved in and out. She touched her tongue to the corner of her lip. Anticipation lit his insides. This was where they grabbed each other and,
Mom, Mr. F, please.
Harper pushed herself between them, a hand up in front of both their faces. What was it about this woman? She got him hot faster than anyone he'd ever met. He'd actually been enjoying that argument.
Seriously, guys, I think that dumpster diving for hardboard sounds like a load of fun, and I think Wyatt would help me, but I'm afraid to leave you two alone. I thought you were kissing Monday night when we walked in, but now I think it's possible you two were putting some weird, twisted WWE moves on each other.
I kind of thought the whole scaffolding falling down was suspect, Wyatt offered hesitantly. It makes more sense to me that they were fighting and crashed into it.
It's a shame I can't leave my own mother alone with the high school principal. What kind of adult am I going to turn out to be?
Harper crossed her arms over her chest and mock glared at her mother. Not disrespectfully, but half playful, half annoyed. Ellie stepped down from the pumpkin, reminding Fink of a queen descending from her royal conveyance. But her apology was sincere.
I'm sorry, I lost my temper. Boy, howdy, Harper said. And I don't even think you two were insulting each other at first. Not on purpose. Mom was just saying she couldn't believe you were going to these extremes to make what she wanted. And you were just saying you'd put a lot of time into it.
They eyed each other. Why did he have such a hard time controlling himself around this woman? His lips lifted at the thought. She grinned back at him. The kids must not have noticed their cheesy smiles, because Wyatt said, "I have an idea about the painting. Uncle Fink can leave school and come here and work on the farm, waiting on customers and whatever for Mrs. Bright. That way she can come down here and paint." Fink's heartbeat settled into a regular rhythm. The feeling that had swelled in his throat was gone. Was it passion? It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to feel anything, he wasn't quite sure. But he was sure he couldn't allow himself to feel it for Ellie. Not now. Focus on the conversation. That's a great idea, Wyatt. I could actually leave the school early for the next 2 days. Maybe by 2:30. He turned to Ellie. Would that help? She stared at the papers, then looked up, mumbling to herself. Finally, she stopped and faced him.
I think that would give me enough time. I can buy the paint tomorrow when I go to town. I'd want to see the hardboard first, but I think I can use a spray paint base. Wyatt and I can go get the hardboard now. Can you two keep from killing each other until we get back?
Mrs. Bright shuffled her feet and peeked up at him.
You were right about the manicure. I've never actually had one. I don't know why your comment made me so angry.
Well, you were right, too. I do have some free time in the afternoon. And lunch. And my free period at school. He put a hand on Wyatt's shoulder. We'll be fine. We'll start the base, and if you two bring the hardboard back, we might be able to tack it up in place tonight before we knock off. Chapter 10. After Harper and Wyatt left, Ellie and Fink fell into the rhythm of the night before. Only this time, in addition to keeping the tools organized and sawing after she measured, Fink also read the instructions, making sure they had the right number of boards cut to the proper length. They had worked in silence for 10 minutes when Fink spoke. You've done a good job with Harper. The tape measure snapped shut, pinching her thumb. Pain poked up her arm. The tape measure bobbled in her hand before she tightened her grip on it.
Thanks. She was a good kid, and it didn't take much. How'd you end up with Wyatt? He seems sweet.
He is. My sister traveled the globe, writing for different magazines. She also worked odd jobs to support her love of travel and adventure. Wyatt's been everywhere. I wasn't always sure how he'd turn out, but she did a great job of chasing her dreams and parenting too. He's respectful, and there's an innocence to him.
Almost like he was homeschooled.
Yeah, I think he was, to some extent, Fink said. Harper has hinted several times about you being young when you had her. How old were you? She didn't want to answer. She wanted to keep pretending there might be a chance for something between them to blossom.
Hand me the saw, please.
He picked it up, but when she reached for it, he didn't let go. She tugged. He held on. How old?
15.
She yanked the saw out of his hand, waiting for the gasp and horrified gaze. His expression did not change. Unsmiling, he stared into her face, like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. Did you think of giving her up?
Sure. My parents wanted me to. Actually, they wanted me to have an abortion. But, hey, I was 15. And stupid. I was almost 6 months along before I realized I wasn't just gaining weight from pizza and soda.
So, no abortion.
It would have been hard, if not impossible. But I wouldn't have done it anyway. Liam and I got married instead, and we moved in with his parents.
She pounded a nail in. He handed her another. You regret that?
Surprisingly, no. My parents were both professionals. Mom worked in public relations and was gone a lot. Dad retired from the Army and drank a lot. I was the baby of their old age. They were almost 50 when I was born.
It had been a lonely childhood. Maybe that's why she had clung to Liam, trying to fill the emptiness left by the absence of her parents. No brothers or sisters?
Nope. Wished for them, but never happened.
She finished pounding the nail and set the hammer down. He moved it after placing the tape measure in her hand. Harper mentioned wanting siblings.
That'd be a little hard since my husband's dead.
He didn't say anything. She marked the board and snapped the tape measure shut, feeling bad about being abrupt.
Liam and I planned on it. I wanted to get my GED first, but you know how you get busy. Life happens. Harper needed me. Then I started working on the farm. Then he was killed.
A paving accident? He handed her the skill saw. She cut the board, the shrill of the saw filling the barn. The end piece fell off, clattered on the floor, and the saw wound down to silence before she asked,
You checked up on me?
It's a small school, small community. I hear rumors. He handed her the hammer and a nail, then picked up the piece she'd cut off and stacked it with the rest of the scraps.
He ran the big roller on the paving crew. He must not have been paying attention, and he ran it far enough off the road that it tipped. They were on a big hill, and once it tipped, it belly rolled clear down the hill. First roll killed him instantly.
She paused to reflect. It had been devastating. She'd built so much of her life around him. But it had happened 10 years ago, and the hurt had mostly healed, leaving an empty space that would probably always be there. Wow, so you had a young child and no husband. She stopped and looked him in the eyes, conscious of his occupation. An education had to be high on his list of priorities in a partner.
No job and not even a high school diploma. But he left me his parents. They've been the parents I never had, and they've been great with Harper.
So you helped on the farm?
Never thought I'd be a farmer, but that's how it turned out.
She laughed without humor, taking the nail he handed her. You seem to like it.
I do. Now that we sell decorations, I get to use my artistic abilities, but I love being outside, love growing things, and I love that Harper has a good, stable home, even if we do work a lot.
So that's why you had the kid there, hoping to take some of the load off?
I guess.
He snorted. I've really added to that load this week.
It'll be good advertising for the farm. We're just not quite making enough money to hire full-time help. The Christmas season is the busiest time of year for us, retail-wise anyway, and if there's someone here helping with all that, I'll have more time to make crafts.
That's a pretty big business for you.
Sure, it's all upmarket.
She shrugged.
And I love it, of course.
Art is your passion.
Yeah. What I'd really like is to have help all summer, trimming the Christmas trees and spraying the apples, taking care of the vegetables so I can get ahead with the decorations. That was my main thought with interviewing Cody. He's still in college, and I figured he'd be looking for full-time work next summer.
She reached for the tape measure he held, but instead of handing it to her, he captured her hand in his own. Her gaze shot to his. He couldn't be serious about her. Couldn't be. Fink didn't seem like the kind of guy to mess with her, but neither did he seem like the kind of guy who would settle for a woman who was uneducated, messy, and perpetually late.
Please don't, Fink.
He dropped her hand. I'm sorry, he murmured. Seems like every time I get around you, I want to get closer."
I have the same want,
she whispered.
but you and it's not something that could ever happen.
She searched his eyes, whether looking for confirmation or denial, she wasn't sure.
Please, Fink, tell me I'm wrong.
When he didn't say anything, her gaze fell and she looked away. There was her answer. This afternoon, when he'd asked to kiss her goodbye, she'd thought that maybe her background wouldn't matter to him. Swallowing something that tasted an awful lot like disappointment, she said,
"Are you going to give me the tape measure, or have you abducted it?"
He cleared his throat, putting it into her outstretched hand. "Sorry." They worked in silence for a while, and Ellie managed to get her runaway emotions under control. Served her right for practically demanding to know what his intentions were. Of course he couldn't come right out and say it, but he really didn't have to. She might not have a degree, any degree, but she wasn't stupid. Her chest felt wooden and her movements jerky. She could tell herself Fink's rejection didn't matter all day long, but she wasn't fooling herself. It stung. It was her own dumb fault for allowing herself to care for someone whom she knew from the get-go could never return her feelings. She bit the insides of her cheeks and tried to ignore the ache in her chest. It wasn't the first disappointment in her life, wouldn't be the last. She couldn't take the silence any longer.
"You came from Iowa. How'd you end up here in PA?"
Fink picked up the hammer Ellie had set down and placed it to the side. "I grew up on a farm in Iowa, but I chose to leave it. I couldn't get away fast enough." He straightened the hammer a fraction of an inch. Satisfied with the exact position of the handle, parallel to the other tools, he rubbed the back of his neck and sighed. "Then my mom got sick. My dad asked me to go back and help them so they wouldn't lose the farm." He swallowed and shook his head. "I chose my career."
"Oh, wow."
He knew his face had closed down, an involuntary reaction when he didn't want to show his true feelings, although he spoke casually, without looking at her, not wanting her to know how deep those feelings ran. "Yeah, she died, and losing the farm killed Dad. Not right away, but within a year. And every day I regret that." Her hands hung suspended in midair, like she'd been reaching for something, but had forgotten what. Her face shone with compassion.
"That regret hasn't stopped you from moving up in your career?"
"I made my choice. Now I get to live with it." His lips flattened. "I graduated from Penn State and got a job here teaching science. I got my master's degree and was hired for the principal position when it opened. I'm working on my doctorate."
"Wow."
She didn't sound happy.
"You're close?"
"Yes, my dissertation should be complete by Christmas, unless I have to make more floats." She snorted.
"Once you have your degree, you've got a job in mind?"
He met her gaze and raised a brow. He'd told her earlier today. Her brow furrowed before the light dawned. She rolled her eyes.
"So that's why you're here. You're up for superintendent, and you need to make sure the school has a float in the parade. Because, after all, we country folk are kind of anal about our parades."
True. He noted the hopeless tone in her voice. Maybe the fact she didn't even have a high school diploma and he was close to getting his doctorate mattered to her. He couldn't tell. Heck, a week ago, it would have mattered to him. Now, not so much. Once he had the superintendent job, his wife not having her high school diploma wouldn't matter to him and should be no one else's business. But the thing that kept him silent, him being with her now, before the vote, that could sway someone's opinion. Someone might think less of him for being with her. He thought of Dr. Rothschild, her tight lips, and how she regarded anything that wasn't completely perfect with intense disapproval. He knew right away that it would matter to her. Could it cost him the job? She was just one vote, but she was also the school board president and highly respected in the community. She might campaign against him. He didn't think she would, but he didn't want to take that chance. He didn't know the other members well enough to say for sure if they would care. Ellie was well liked by folks in the county, he knew that much. But that was taking an awful big chance, basing his career on how much people liked her. His brain said to let her go. After the vote, though, different story. Was it wrong to wait until next Thursday? To think he had time might be too egotistical. Ellie had become too important to lightly dismiss. He'd talk to her next Thursday and do whatever it took to get her to agree to take a chance on him. Because, although it terrified him, he'd realized what this crazy feeling he had for Ellie was. Love. Thursday morning, Fink pulled into the school parking lot, a little slower than he had the past 2 days because he wasn't late. Yet. The bell was going to ring in 3 minutes, but he couldn't speed in the parking lot. Kids were still hurrying inside the building. It would be a bad example. As he pulled his briefcase out of the back seat, the low rumble of Ellie's pickup cut through the clear morning air. Funny how that noise used to be annoying. It now made him smile. She, too, drove only a fraction of her normal speed. Harper waved at kids who yelled at her through the window. The second day in a row she hadn't had to hang on for dear life. Fink quickened his pace so he could open Ellie's door for her. If Harper hopped out quickly, she wouldn't be late. Harper was no fool, and as Fink leaned against Ellie's window and the bell rang, she was already following Wyatt into the school. Ellie wound her window down with the crank. "I guess I won't need this." She held up a white piece of paper with writing he assumed was Harper's late excuse and tore it into pieces, her eyes aglow with life and laughter. Fink found himself leaning in the window toward her, drawn to the happiness and vivacity she exuded. He stopped himself from reaching for her but didn't step away. "You look nice." She wore a scooped-neck pink blouse and a blue skirt. Her cheeks pinked. "I have to run to town and grab some paint. My in-laws can probably handle the farm unless we get a last-minute group in, and I should be able to paint all day." "Great." He stared into her eyes, almost forgetting what he was going to say. "I'll be out to help as soon as I can." "They'll be expecting you." She glanced down. Her lips pulled back and one brow lifted. "You look good, too." She stared at his biceps. His agreement with Jordan had actually helped him bulk up some, and it was possible he'd set his arm on her window hoping she'd notice. "I thought I'd go casual today since I'll be going straight to the farm after school." He'd worn a polo shirt and slacks. There was no dress code, so he might as well. "I like it," she said softly. He stood there, grinning like a fool for too long, before remembering he needed to get into the school. "Have a good day." He stepped back. "You too," she said, then shifted into gear and chugged out of the parking lot. Fink left the school immediately after the kids were dismissed. He caught himself going 43 in a 35-mile-per-hour zone. He couldn't remember the last time he speeded. His stomach churned with excitement as Wyatt and he pulled into the tree farm. He didn't even try to pretend he wasn't looking for Ellie. His head swiveled in every direction. Probably 50 people milled around in the pumpkin patch and corn maze, with a few scattered around eating hot dogs and dodging the campfire smoke. Children jumped in the leaves that had fallen from the red maples by the shop. He didn't see Ellie. Fink and Wyatt stepped into the office. Ellie's mother-in-law greeted them. "I'm Calvin Finkenbinder. I told Ellie I'd help out today and tomorrow so she could paint." She bustled over, dusting her hands off on her apron.
I'm Esther. I've been expecting you. Let me finish up here, then I'll show you a few things and get you started. With the warm weather we've been having, the corn maze has been popular, and we've had brisk business all week, except yesterday evening. Things clear out quickly when it rains."
She laughed, a tinkling sound that made Fink smile. He concealed his disappointment that Ellie wasn't there to show him what to do. Esther rearranged a few wreaths on the display table.
"I wish Ellie had time to replenish her supply of fall decorations. We're almost out."
She placed her hands on her hips, tilting her head and studying her handiwork.
"A local church is bringing a group of folks out tonight, so we're going to be especially busy."
Her gaze landed on Wyatt, standing at the edge of the doorway, and she stopped short.
"Are you here to help too?"
He nodded.
"That's great. Harper just walked down to fill the tubs with water for apple bobbing. You scoot on down and she'll put you to work."
A corner of Wyatt's mouth lifted. He turned, tripping on his extra-large feet, but caught himself before he sprawled down the wooden steps.
"Mr. Finkenbinder, how about you step over here and I'll show you the price list?"
He fought down impatience and irritation as he strode over to Esther. He'd come to help so Ellie could work on the float, but a small part of him wanted her to miss him as much as he missed her. For her to be here, looking for him, eager to see him too. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.